Hi friends, my name is Lena, welcome to my channel. I make big hit theories, and today we are going to be talking about ENHYPEN again, because I cannot believe what just dropped. I was not expecting it at all. Big Hit has fed us truly. On top of the trailers that we got, they also actually announced the names of the first albums, which seem to have two versions. Border, Day 1, versions Dawn and Dusk. I'll talk about these as we go. Anyways, I'm not going to take up too much time. You read the title of this video, so let's just go. When opposing ideas connect. We know that ENHYPEN is meant to have the theme of connection, discovery, and growth. In my last video covering ENHYPEN, I mentioned that their name, which is similar to a hyphen and its use, literally connects things together. The hyphen's job is to create meanings and new words when they are strung together. ENHYPEN is meant to connect things that are different or far apart the way that a hyphen connects words together. The first trailer perfectly demonstrates that. Right away, we are given words that are essentially opposites of each other. Trainee to artist, failure to success. Given, taken, blood, light, us, the others, mortal, and immortal. While they're not all obviously opposite, they do broadly present a stark difference between each other. Now, I'm gonna break these down just a bit, but first, the most broad understanding of what's going on here is the obvious suggestion that they are becoming vampires. This is shown with the idea of the opposites. For example, trainee to artist. They entered this forest for island, and then when they emerged, they were no longer just trainees, but artists. Likewise, as the first video progresses, it takes us through a transformation as well, where we understand that it is referencing island, but it's also referencing their story as ENHYPEN. So they entered the forest, in island, as mortals, and then exited as immortal vampires. We see this progression in the second trailer for Dawn to Dusk, where they seem pretty normal at first, but then end up like hanging upside down, no longer having a reflection, etc. And then at the end, it does seem like the sun is burning them. Of course, they haven't actually explicitly said the word vampires, so there's definitely some leeway there for them to deviate from this, or even create perhaps their own unique form of a immortal vampire. But at the moment, it seems that they're specifically focusing on these tropes, probably trying to make it seem recognizable to people. But it's also worth noting that, especially in GFriend, the idea of a forest is a representation of the inner mind labyrinth, something that you enter in order to find yourself. A labyrinth has only one opening. The entrance and exit are the same, and that is what differentiates it from a maze, which will have one entrance and then an exit somewhere else. So basically, you walk around and you try and discover yourself, so when you emerge from a labyrinth, you are changed. This is similar to Jung's idea of self-actualization. They seem to focus on them looking over the forest, or perhaps the labyrinth, as the sun rises. Maybe they're entering it for the first time. After all, their album is called Border, Day 1. Is this day one on the boundary of a new existence that they must navigate? What are they going to learn? But now let's further break down each of the trailers they've given us and figure out what these word associations might mean. Starting with the first trailer, choose to chosen, as in they originally chose to be there, but in the end, it was them who was chosen. Now, the idea of choice, especially in psychology, is a very powerful one, since choosing to do something often gives you power over the results and changes how you feel about it. To me, this plays gently into the idea of the island show because they chose to be there, and they were also later the ones who were chosen to leave as part of a group. But this largely reflects the story they're trying to tell us here. How many of them chose to become what they became in regards to the story's universe? In the Dusk to Dawn trailer, they seem a bit frightened in some cases. Was it their choice, or were they simply bitten and chosen to become something else? Trainee to artist. A trainee is still learning, so they're not the artist with the professional skill level. The connection here, though, is, as I mentioned before, very obvious as a tie-in to Island. They even show it directly on the video with a practice video on the left and a stage performance on the right. This feels like it represents ENHYPEN and where they started, and now that they're debuting, they will be rookies, but they are considered artists in their own right. Immediately after the screen, Jake's narration tells us how much they wanted to transform, as in how much they wanted to travel from the idea of a trainee to the idea of an artist. They worked hard for this. This theme is really important in general though, as in all all of these different ideas can transform into the other by following the line that connects them, the hyphen, or combining them to transform into something new, which I will talk about later. Jake says a line, "We believed that there lay dreams unknown." This might be referencing some of the song lyrics they have as well, such as those in Chamber 5, which pretty much talks exclusively about dreams. Failure to success. This imagery is really interesting to me. The failure side shows a fully bloomed rose being burned, while success shows a rose upside down, opening up. A rose, in the language of flowers, represents passion. So if we think of this as being the passion and drive to go after dreams, the fire would represent that you've thrown it away, given up, and burned the passion, while the one blooming would be their passions growing with the success that they see. It might be upside down though, because sometimes success takes you in directions that you don't always see when you're aiming for it. This once again pertains to the idea of idols really well, but I think at this point we've already shifted from the view of idols into their storyline. And this idea of being able to have the contrast between those who failed and those who succeeded, and the path that is in between that, is likely important to the story, and this is why they've chosen to emphasize it. Though I assume this is obviously the case for all of the words that they've shown. Also, the idea of success is largely dependent on the person. Who's to say what is a success and what isn't? After all, in the image here, we see that failure did, in fact, have a full flower. Therefore, the future lay in something other than simply the growth of the flower. You need failure to reach success, even if the word failure itself feels like it's the ending. This also makes me think of the Demian quote that they used in Island. The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Who would be born must first destroy a world. You must destroy a world in order to create a new one. Sometimes you must move on from your failures in order to have success. Does this have to do with their vampire-like transformations? The voiceover then tells us that every path is stained with tears, emphasizing the idea that you don't always know what to expect in regards to success or failure. Obviously, if you end up debuting and that is success to you, then you could cry happy tears, but with success comes its own problems as well, as I've mentioned. Is this why we see an empty throne on the Dusk version of the album? What exactly does their success have them do? What is considered a failure to them? Given to taken. Being given something, while you do end up with the thing you are given, is not the same as having taken the object. Likewise, giving and taking things themselves are two entirely different acts. One is a lot more active than the other. Perhaps some of them have been given something, while the others have decided to take it. The line that Jake says here about being blessing or a curse reminds me a lot of Una questioning the same thing in G-Friend. Obviously, these are different events and stories, but we can understand what is happening due to context. In G-Friend, they were gifted powers which caused them to fight between themselves. In ENHYPEN, this thing that they were given, or perhaps took on their own, might be both a blessing and a curse. I'm really excited to see where this is going to take us. Blood to light. Knowing they're possibly following the idea of vampires, blood and light represent life and death in a way, though they could possibly represent a few different things, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was multi-layered. Blood being the thing that they need for survival, and light is the thing that causes them pain and could kill them. In terms of the narrative of Island, blood could represent the literal idea of blood, sweat, and tears. They follow the path, the literal hyphen, which then leads to the light of the stage and their debut. Otherwise, blood could be darkness, in a sense, something that you see when you're wounded. In most cases, people consider blood to be something generally negative. Light, on the other hand, brings forward the saturated colors of the world and hides the darkness of the blood, instead showing its colors brightly and illuminating the shadows that the darkness has caused. The video tells us about the blood moon, which is a marriage of these two ideas, a dark scarlet of blood and the bright light that gives us the ability to see. Interestingly, even the red of the blood moon is something caused by a lack of light, as it is actually the shadow of the earth covering the moon from the sun's reflecting light. You and I feel like one, even when we're apart. It's like a pair of quantum particles entangled even from a distance. Across space and time, we meet eye to eye, doesn't this kind of sound like a lunar eclipse? Remember that ENHYPEN is about bringing things together, like a hyphen. These are all ideas that I feel like they're trying to connect. I bet that these trailers are videos that I will reference even far into the future of ENHYPEN. I wouldn't be surprised if their whole storyline is just as well thought out as TXT's. Speaking of TXT, they were first introduced with eclipse imagery, so I wonder if that somehow ties in. It should be noted that TXT also have a forest on Magic Island, which I often associate with their subconscious mind becoming reality. Once again, the idea of the labyrinth in the mind. To bring us back to the blood moon though, historically it was interpreted to symbolize the end times, as in the world ending. The sun will turn into darkness and moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. This was a prophecy from the book of Joel. But the moon turning red has always been something that people find significant, largely because of the fact that it's a rarer astronomical event. The idea of the end times, though, might not be too far off. Are ENHYPEN perhaps towards the end of this universe's story? Or does the blood moon simply signify the end of their mortal life before they reside as an immortal, since they do seem to be shifting on that night in particular? We also see a red burning moon in the background of their dance performance for Flame On, and this is definitely not a coincidence. In fact, if you look at any of their performances, they do seem to know where they were going with ENHYPEN because there's just a lot of hints. Also, people have pointed out that there's actually meant to be a blood moon on November 30th this year, so there is speculation that ENHYPEN's debut will be on this day. Also, unrelated to the moon, I wanted to mention that this does seem to be the same car that is in 17's music videos, Home Run, and Left and Right. I'm not sure if this is significant, if it's an Easter egg, or if for some reason they just decided to use the same car in these music videos, but it does feel important to point out. Was this car abandoned by 17, or like did ENHYPEN just steal the car? Us to the others. In the imagery here under us, they are shown closing a window to the light, definitely adding to the idea that us is referring to vampires or creatures of the night, while the others are, well, not. People may look up to those who are immortal and have immortality with envy, hence the fact that we see the back of a person on the side of the others. However, as we can draw a line between the two, we can assume that the vampires do have a way of becoming the other once again, because the placement of us is before the others. The question of what one would do with immortality is actually a common question in philosophy, because sometimes it is the fact that we are to meet an end that gives us a motive for us to live life to the fullest. If you are an immortal, what is it that you have to live for, since you no longer have the timer of death? Beyond the placement of the wording, the end of the Dawn to Dusk trailer makes me think that they are trying to be out while in the daylight. As the blue hour turns golden and the sun rises, they start to smoke, as if they're burning up in the sun's rays. I do also wonder if this is perhaps social commentary on idols in general. Many people put them on a pedestal, and yet at the end of the day, that separation between idols and other people is negligible. Sure, they're getting more attention than the average person, but they're also just a human like the rest of us. They're just as relatable as everyone else. Their purposes should be to inspire you and believe that you can follow your dreams no matter how hidden or impossible they may be. Because just like them, we, the others, can also strive for our goals. Mortal to immortal. This obviously connects to the idea of vampires, again, as vampires are usually an immortal being. But even beyond that, there's more to this idea of immortality. I have previously talked about ENHYPEN's tie to Abraxas because of a quote from Demian that was used in the episode of Island. Abraxas represents both good and evil, both sides of an equation and the balance that it creates. It also has ties to the 7 classic planets, which I previously connected to the boys, and I do think that the planetary tie-in is still possible. After all, a lot of myths are actually based around planets, especially those of the Greek origin. Are the boys going to be related to gods somehow? The idea of immortality fits in really well with this idea. And it explains why people might look up to them, while they envy mortality because they are immortal. I'm not saying they are gods though. As we know, they seem to be vampires, but similarly to how BTS has ties to Greek gods, and yet in their notes, which does contain the bulk of their story, they don't actually seem to be gods at all. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some additional tie-in here to the stories of the gods for ENHYPEN. This might also tie into the throne that we see in the Dusk version. Although, especially since they referenced Demian previously, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if this once again showed another form of Carl Jung's theory of self-actualization, because the Demian book is centered around his theory. This idea is applicable to many stories, since it's something that happens naturally even if you get stuck sometimes and overemphasize certain points of your personality, such as the shadow. Actually, speaking of the shadow, we already see so many ideas representing the shadow in these trailers. I think it's likely that to some degree we will see this process being shown to us yet again, although I doubt it'll be the main focus. But I hear you asking, what are they? What if they're not vampires? What about if they're werewolves? Why is the moon tying into this? Like I said before, I do think that they'll slightly change the rules for vampires, and I don't believe that they're werewolves personally, but it's possible that someone is one, or that I'm just wrong in general and maybe they are werewolves. But yeah, as I mentioned, it's likely that they didn't necessarily choose to be a vampire or this immortal being, whatever they are, themselves. It's also not 100% clear that they are actually non-human in the end, or like the beginning, I guess, technically. I do actually think that this idea of what are we is going to be a large part of their story. This connection between two differing ideas and stages of life, or two opposite things like giving and taking, and the lines that connect them is largely a one-way street. Why must we walk along this endless line? Jake's words here make me wonder if it's going to be them discovering that there's more between the two different sides. It's not black and white, one or the other. There's more to it than just the bridge between each side, and you can actually step off and walk through the river if you so choose. A lot of their song lyrics talk about having a secret dream, especially Chamber 5, where it tells us that they're trying to walk on the line and work within the rules. But deep within their heart, literally an extra hidden chamber of their heart, they had a wish. I closed my eyes and it pushed it out of my mind, in case the word dream made me go blind. Even when I felt the thrill, I ignored it, hating my will. If I can't have it, then I won't wish for it. Likewise, it can take these two opposite meanings and create new life, a transformation. Have they passed the borders that cage the definition of their descriptions and move into an entirely new territory? I wouldn't be surprised if Big Hit somehow created a new supernatural being for their storyline, even beyond the whole vampire narrative. Likewise, it's possible that some of the boys have different strengths than others. While they all seem to have either been a vampire or changed into one in the Dawn to Dusk trailer, they are all shown exhibiting something specific. It's hard to tell if these are general abilities or if you can only do one thing. And I do still think this will somehow tie into the current Big Hit universe with TXT, BTS, and GFriend, and possibly 17? I don't know, the car is confusing. Are they on Magic Island? I don't know, and until we have more information, I couldn't tell you. But like all of the previous groups, they will most likely have their own story that is separate from the others, but it will take place in and affect the overall universe. It'll expand upon what we already know, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a recurring character, like the cat. And as I mentioned, the theme of Carl Jung's self-actualization is probably underlying throughout the whole thing. The N-Genes, as fans, can help them build tracks to whatever direction they want. I think this is a really fitting fan name, personally. It's easy to see the relation between the fan name and the group name itself, since they sort of sound similar, but even then, the idea of genes and DNA works so well with this vampire theme. And as I mentioned, the theme of choice and choosing to do something different, which is very contrary to what the line says, is likely something that they'll want to focus on. Maybe they will create their own lines, and us as N-Genes will engine on through them. But what do you think? Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you got some insight from it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and if you aren't already, make sure that you subscribe to the channel with the notifications turned on so that you're notified every single time that I post a video. All of my social media is in the description below, including my Discord server where we have a whole bunch of theory chats, my Twitch where I stream every Tuesday and Sunday, and my Patreon. Speaking of patrons, I wanted to give a shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you to Rally Car, Alacia S, Lame Game Hero, Logan, Dylan Colster, Lexi95. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your support. As it is, my friends, stay sunny, and I will see you next time. Bye!